In this video, we will talk about materials in 3ds Max, and in particular, we're going to talk about some effects that are related to materials and textures. So in the previous videos, we saw how we can create standard materials, basic materials, using the PBR basic parameters and channels. So like the diffuse, the roughness. We applied also textures using these same channels. So the roughness textures, the diffuse texture, and also the bump and the normal texture to create some fake 3D effect on the walls here, for example. So we created materials using maps, procedural maps, textures, and also we experimented with both physical materials from 3ds Max and Arnold materials because we're using Arnold renders. So I'm gonna set up here some exterior scene for the rendering that we're gonna do later, and also I'm gonna adjust the interior so we can test materials and lights in an exterior environment and an interior environment. So I'm just creating kind of a ground here or a site for my project. So I'm gonna start with a simple plane, and later I will apply some more effect. But one thing I can actually do real quick to the modifier is I can apply a noise. Now we saw that the noise is something that we want to get rid of when we are talking about rendering, but this is also an effect which is going to create not a uniform look to, in this case, to the object where we apply it. So if we are creating a terrain, if we are creating something that well is supposed not to be so flat, we can directly apply a noise, and that's going to be a real effect in this case. So this is not a fake bump effect, this is an actual noise. So we are using a parametric map, some sort of procedural effect here, but this is an actual 3D. We can definitely see the polygons are moving in the floor there, in the terrain. And of course, if I need more quality, I need to increase the subdivisions. So the more subdivisions I will have, the more soft and organic this terrain will be, just as we saw in the lessons about polymodeling. Now I can adjust the scale also, and we're gonna see how we can create some mapping, not using just the tiling and the the repetitions in the textures of the material. So we're gonna make examples of also the difference between an actual 3D extrusion like we just did with the noise command and a fake 3D. So we can simulate the same effect, the same 3D superficial effect using a bump map and a noise procedural map. I can do that to create, for example, the surface of a swimming pool. So instead of actually creating the waves of the swimming pool, I can create a material and apply a bump. So let's make this again kind of a green material, and we're gonna see the difference between an actual extrusion or an actual displacement and a fake extrusion like a bump or a normal. So we will create later also materials using displacement instead of bump. So right now I just want to apply this to the bump map of the standard physical 3D Studio Max material. So you can see there is a noise procedural map. So again, noise can be something to get rid of when we're talking about rendering, but can also be applied sometimes to have more realism also in renderings. But most of the time it's going to be applied to don't have something too uniform, too perfect. So it's like adding the imperfection to something to create it less flat and uniform and perfect. So you can see there that if I activate the visualization of the texture, I can see the texture displayed there on the viewport. So it looks pretty big, and with this I can create, like, hills and then I can also adjust it. So I can see here the look of my bump when I show the texture inside the scene. So right now it's showing just the texture and not the color because I have clicked on the visualization of the texture. And I can adjust again the tiling, which is some sort of mapping operation that you can already do. So I'm trying to find more or less the same scale of the other noise modifier that I have applied before on that other surface, and that's pretty much similar. So I'm gonna go up, and again I'm seeing now just the bump texture. So I can also cut now from there, so I can just paste it into the actual bump. So, and I can increase the value of the bump. So when I do this cut and paste, I can use it for the diffuse just to scale it and then paste it into the bump map to visualize it. Otherwise, I can click there to visualize show shaded material in viewport. In this case, since we are inside that texture, it's only going to show me that texture. So that's not the actual material. But you can see that if I display the overall material, it's not visible. Try to go to render mode. So in the render mode, we can actually see the bump effect. Otherwise, in the preview mode, it's not really visible. So we can see here we created two different terrains. One is with a fake 3D, which is from the bump map or the bump channel. The other one is an actual 3D. So this is what the bump and normal texture are used for. They're used to simulate details and 3D extrusions, 3D reliefs, 3D details that are not actually there in terms of polygons. They're just faking the more complex meshes, the more details. So if you see that from a distance, it won't make the difference. But if you get closer, you can start to see that that's a fake effect. That's not an actual extrusion. So you can use the displacement if you want something more realistic. And the displacement map is just like the bump map. So it's a black and white texture or map. So the black represents the part that is not extruded, the white represents the part that will be extruded the most, and then you have all the shades of gray which represent the middle values. So you can manage how your material is gonna look like in terms of these superficial 3D reliefs or displacement just by applying the texture and again change the parameters. So you can see that the displacement effect is more visible on the edges of the object, but on the front view they look pretty much similar, even though displacement is always stronger than a bump. The real difference is in the edges. So you can tell by the edges of an object if that's a real 3D or a fake effect. So we will see the difference between bump and displacement. It's really easy to use, and well, it's also a heavier effect. So displacement is gonna get your scene heavier than it is, while there are other textures like the opacity texture that are gonna help you to simplify and lower the heaviness of your scene. So with opacity texture, for example, instead of creating a wire or a perforated metal panel, I can just apply a texture and that's going to create holes on a surface. So I don't need to use the boolean to create holes on a panel. I can just use a black and white picture, which is called the opacity texture, or also called sometimes cutout texture.